The early morning light filtered through the tall windows of Kensington Palace as Prince William opened his eyes. He could already feel the energy of the historic day beginning to build around him. His heart beat just a little faster than usual as he remembered what this day would bring. The coronation of a new monarch was not just another royal event. It was a moment that would be written in history books forever. Catherine was already awake beside him, her calm presence providing comfort as always. They had been preparing for this day for many weeks. Every detail had been carefully planned, from the timing of their arrival to the exact positioning of the children during the ceremony. But no amount of preparation could fully ready them for the magnitude of what was about to unfold. Down the hall, the sounds of three young voices began to fill the palace corridors. George, Charlotte, and Louis were awake, and their excitement was already bubbling over. Their nanny had laid out their specially made outfits the night before. Each piece had been crafted with precision to ensure the children would look their absolute best while still being comfortable enough to endure the long ceremony ahead. William rose from bed and walked to the window. Outside, he could see the first signs of the massive preparations. Security teams moved with purpose across the palace grounds. Television crews were setting up their equipment along the procession route. Barriers were being placed to manage the crowds that would soon fill every available space in central London. The scale of the operation was truly remarkable. Catherine joined him at the window, slipping her hand into his. They stood together in silence for a moment, both understanding the weight of responsibility that came with their roles. As the Prince of Wales and future king, William would play a central part in today's ceremony. His every move would be watched and analyzed by millions around the world. The pressure was immense, but it was a burden he had been trained to carry since birth. Breakfast was a carefully orchestrated affair. The children needed to eat enough to sustain them through the long morning, but not so much that they would feel uncomfortable in their formal clothes. George, always the responsible older brother, ate his meal with careful precision. Charlotte chatted excitedly about seeing the crown jewels again. Little Louis was more interested in making shapes with his toast than actually eating it. The palace staff moved through their duties with practiced efficiency. Hairdressers arrived to style Catherine's hair into an elegant arrangement that would hold perfectly beneath her ceremonial headpiece. Valets checked and double-checked every button and medal on William's military uniform. Nothing could be left to chance on such an important day. As the morning progressed, the children were dressed in their finery. George looked remarkably grown up in his miniature version of formal court dress. Charlotte's dress had been specially designed to allow her to move comfortably while still maintaining the required level of formality. Louis, the youngest, was dressed in a smart outfit that balanced tradition with practicality for an active young boy. William took a moment to speak privately with each of his children. He knelt beside George, reminding him of the importance of setting a good example for his younger siblings. With Charlotte, he shared a special father-daughter moment, praising her for how beautifully she looked. For Louis, he kept things simple, asking him to hold Mummy's hand and be a good boy during the ceremony. The final preparations were almost complete. Catherine's dress, a masterpiece of British craftsmanship, fit perfectly. Her jewelry had been carefully selected to complement both her outfit and her role. William's uniform bore the medals and honors that reflected his military service and royal position. Together, they looked every inch the future king and queen consort. As the family gathered in the palace entrance hall, ready to depart for Westminster Abbey, William felt a surge of pride. His children stood before him, perfectly turned out and radiating excitement. Catherine was a vision of elegance and composure. Whatever challenges the day might bring, they would face them together as a family. The sound of the approaching cars signaled that it was time to leave. History was calling, and the Wales family was ready to answer. The palace doors opened with a gentle creak as the Wales family stepped into the bright morning sunlight. The courtyard was filled with a golden glow that seemed to bless this momentous day. A line of gleaming black cars waited patiently, their surfaces polished to mirror perfection. Each vehicle had been specially prepared for the royal procession, with comfortable interiors designed to keep the family calm during their journey through London. William helped Catherine into the car first, her dress requiring careful arrangement to avoid any wrinkles. The fabric cascaded beautifully across the leather seats as she settled herself gracefully. George climbed in next, his movements careful and measured, already showing the bearing of a future king. Charlotte bounced slightly as she entered, her excitement barely contained despite her best efforts to appear dignified. Little Louis needed a boost from his father, his short legs not quite reaching the running board. As the convoy began to move, the palace gates swung open to reveal the first glimpse of the waiting crowds. People had been gathering since the early hours of the morning, some having camped overnight to secure the best viewing spots. The sight was overwhelming even for William, who had witnessed many royal occasions. Today felt different. Today carried the weight of 1,000 years of history. The streets of London had been transformed into a tapestry of red, white, and blue. Union Jack flags fluttered from every available surface. Banners declaring loyalty and love for the monarchy stretched across buildings. Shop windows displayed special coronation merchandise, and giant screens had been erected in parks and squares for those who couldn't line the route. The entire capital had become a stage for this grand performance. Inside the car, Catherine kept the children entertained with quiet games and gentle conversation. She pointed out interesting sights along the route, turning the journey into an educational experience. George pressed his face close to the window, taking in every detail of the spectacle unfolding outside. Charlotte waved enthusiastically whenever she caught someone's eye, her natural charm shining through the bulletproof glass. Louis alternated between excitement and moments of quiet observation, his young mind trying to process the magnitude of what was happening. The crowds grew thicker as they approached Westminster. Police officers stood at regular intervals, their presence reassuring but unobtrusive. Barriers kept the enthusiastic public at a safe distance, while still allowing them to feel part of the celebration. Television cameras tracked the convoy's progress, broadcasting every moment to viewers around the globe. William knew that millions were watching, sharing in this historic day through their screens. The sound of cheering grew louder with each passing mile. People called out their good wishes, some holding handmade signs expressing their support for the royal family. Veterans in medals saluted as the cars passed. School children in neat uniforms waved small flags with unbridled enthusiasm. The diversity of the crowd reflected modern Britain, with people from all walks of life united in their desire to witness history. William felt a familiar flutter in his stomach as Westminster Abbey came into view. The ancient building stood majestically against the London skyline, its Gothic spires reaching toward heaven. This sacred space had witnessed the coronation of monarchs for nearly 1,000 years. Today, it would add another chapter to its storied history. The weight of tradition pressed down upon him, but Catherine's reassuring smile helped steady his nerves. The car slowed as they approached the Abbey entrance. Through the windows, they could see other members of the royal family arriving. Dignitaries from around the world emerged from their vehicles, their elaborate costumes and uniforms creating a rainbow of color and tradition. The careful choreography of arrivals had been rehearsed multiple times, ensuring everyone would be in their proper place when the ceremony began. As their car pulled to a stop, William took a deep breath. He looked at his family, each member ready to play their part in this historic day. Catherine gave his hand one final squeeze before the door opened. The roar of the crowd hit them like a physical force, thousands of voices raised in celebration. Stepping out onto the red carpet, the Wales family was ready to take their place in history. The massive doors of Westminster Abbey loomed before them as the Wales family paused on the ancient stone steps. The cheers from the crowd seemed to echo off the historic walls, creating a symphony of celebration that filled the air. William straightened his shoulders and took a steadying breath. The familiar scent of old stone and centuries of incense greeted them as they crossed the threshold into the sacred space. Inside the abbey, the atmosphere changed dramatically. The noise from outside faded to a distant murmur, replaced by the hushed reverence of the gathering congregation. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, painting rainbow patterns across the stone floor. Every surface seemed to glow with an otherworldly light, as if the building itself understood the significance of what was about to unfold. George walked beside his father, his young face set in an expression of serious concentration. He had been carefully prepared for this moment, understanding that his behavior would reflect not just on his family, but on the future of the monarchy itself. Charlotte held her mother's hand, her eyes wide with wonder as she took in the magnificent surroundings. Louis, sensing the change in atmosphere, pressed closer to Catherine, his usual exuberance temporarily subdued by the grandeur around him. The abbey was already filled with guests from around the world. Prime ministers and presidents sat alongside duchesses and dukes. Religious leaders from various faiths occupied special seats, their presence symbolizing the inclusive nature of modern Britain. Each guest had been carefully selected, their invitation a recognition of their importance to the nation or the crown. The mix of ancient tradition and contemporary diversity created a unique tapestry of humanity. As the Wales family made their way to their designated seats, nods and smiles were exchanged with familiar faces. Extended family members offered encouraging glances. Foreign royalty, many of whom had known William since childhood, acknowledged their arrival with subtle gestures of support. The children walked with remarkable poise, their training evident in every measured step. The seating arrangement had been meticulously planned to reflect both protocol and practicality. William and Catherine's seats positioned them prominently while still allowing them to manage their children effectively. George sat between his parents initially, with Charlotte on Catherine's other side and Louis on her lap. The arrangement could be adjusted as needed throughout the long ceremony, a flexibility necessary when involving young children in such formal occasions. Around them, the abbey buzzed with quiet activity as final preparations were made. Clergy in elaborate vestments moved through their preparatory rituals. The choir took their positions in the ancient stalls, their red and white robes creating a striking visual against the dark wood. Musicians tuned their instruments with careful precision, knowing that every note would be heard by millions around the world. The television cameras were discreetly positioned to capture every angle without intruding on the sacred nature of the ceremony. William was acutely aware of their presence, knowing that his family's every expression would be analyzed and discussed for years to come. He exchanged a quick glance with Catherine, drawing strength from her calm confidence. Together, they had faced many challenges, and together they would navigate this historic day. As more guests arrived, the abbey filled with a sense of anticipation that was almost palpable. Conversations were conducted in hushed tones, everyone aware that they were participants in a moment that would be remembered for generations. The weight of history pressed down from the vaulted ceilings, where the tombs of kings and queens bore silent witness to another chapter in Britain's royal story. Louis began to fidget slightly, his young energy difficult to contain in such a formal setting. Catherine produced a small, soft toy from her bag, a contingency she had wisely prepared. The simple distraction worked perfectly, keeping the youngest Wales child occupied without creating any disruption. Charlotte whispered something to her mother, receiving a gentle nod and smile in response. George remained focused, his gaze fixed on the altar where the ceremony would soon unfold. The abbey bells began to toll, their deep resonance signaling that the moment was drawing near. The congregation began to settle, conversations dying away as all eyes turned toward the great west door. The Wales family adjusted their positions one final time, ready for the ceremony that would change their lives forever. The great organ of Westminster Abbey suddenly burst into life, its powerful notes filling every corner of the ancient building. The sound was so majestic that even little Louis stopped fidgeting and looked up with wonder. The congregation rose as one, a sea of color and movement as hundreds of guests stood in perfect unison. William helped his family to their feet, his hand gently guiding George, while Catherine managed Charlotte and Louis with practiced ease. The processional music swelled to fill the vast space, its melody both ancient and timeless. Through the great west door came the first members of the ceremonial procession. Church officials in elaborate robes moved with measured steps down the center aisle. Their faces were solemn but peaceful, understanding the sacred nature of their roles in this historic ceremony. Behind them came bearers carrying ancient symbols of royal authority, each item polished to perfection. George watched everything with intense concentration, his young mind absorbing every detail. William noticed his son's focused expression and felt a surge of pride. The boy was showing maturity beyond his years, understanding instinctively that this was not just another royal event, but something truly special. Charlotte stood on tiptoes to see better, her hand gripping her mother's tightly. Louis, lifted into Catherine's arms for a better view, pointed excitedly at the colorful procession. The abbey's atmosphere grew even more electric as the procession continued. High-ranking military officials marched in perfect formation, their medals glinting in the filtered sunlight. Representatives from Commonwealth nations walked proudly, their traditional dress adding splashes of vibrant color to the formal proceedings. Each participant had been carefully chosen, their presence representing different aspects of the nation and its history. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. The sovereign entered the abbey, and the entire congregation seemed to hold its breath. The historic regalia sparkled under the lights, centuries-old jewels catching and reflecting the illumination in dazzling displays. The crown jewels, normally kept under strict security in the Tower of London, were now on full display in their intended setting. The sight was breathtaking, even for those who had witnessed royal ceremonies before. William felt the weight of destiny as he watched the procession approach their seats. One day, this would be his journey to make. The thought was both thrilling and sobering. He glanced at George, wondering if his son was having similar thoughts. The boy's expression remained serious and attentive, suggesting he understood more than his young age might suggest. This was the burden and privilege of being born into the line of succession. The music reached its crescendo as the main party arrived at the altar. Catherine had prepared the children well for this moment, explaining how they must remain still and quiet during the most solemn parts of the ceremony. Even Louis seemed to understand, his usual energy channeled into intense observation of the spectacle unfolding before them. The family stood in perfect formation, their unity and composure noted by observers around the world. As the music faded, a profound silence fell over the abbey. It was the kind of quiet that seemed to stretch back through centuries, connecting this moment to every coronation that had come before. The archbishop stepped forward, his voice carrying clearly through the ancient space as he began the time-honored words that would guide the ceremony. The familiar phrases, some dating back nearly 1,000 years, connected the present to an unbroken chain of tradition. William noticed Charlotte lean slightly against her mother, the excitement and early morning beginning to take their toll. Catherine's arm went around her daughter automatically, providing comfort without drawing attention. This was the delicate balance they had to maintain, being parents while also fulfilling their royal duties. It was a challenge they had grown accustomed to, but never had the stakes been quite so high. The ceremony began to unfold with clockwork precision. Each movement, each word, each gesture had been rehearsed and refined. The choreography was perfect, yet somehow it maintained a sense of genuine reverence and meaning. As the sacred rituals commenced, the Wales family settled into their roles, ready to witness history in the making. The archbishop's voice rang out across the abbey as the sacred ceremony began to unfold. His words, some written centuries ago, carried the weight of tradition and continuity. William listened intently, knowing that every phrase had been spoken at coronations throughout British history. The familiar liturgy created a bridge between past and present, connecting this moment to the long line of monarchs who had stood in this very place. George shifted slightly in his seat, maintaining his composure despite the length of the ceremony. His eyes followed every movement at the altar, taking in the elaborate rituals with the seriousness of someone far older than his years. William placed a gentle hand on his son's shoulder, a silent gesture of support and approval. The young prince was performing admirably under the intense scrutiny of the watching world. The ceremony progressed through its ancient stages, each element carefully choreographed and deeply meaningful. The presentation of the various regalia items created moments of breathtaking spectacle. The orb, symbolizing earthly power under Christian authority, gleamed in the abbey's lights. The scepters, representing temporal and spiritual authority, were displayed with reverent care. Each item told a story of monarchy and service that stretched back through the ages. Charlotte whispered something quietly to her mother, her young voice barely audible even to those sitting nearest. Catherine bent her head to listen, then whispered back a brief explanation. The little princess nodded solemnly, her natural curiosity satisfied for the moment. She smoothed her dress carefully, remembering her mother's instructions about sitting properly during the long ceremony. Her behavior was exemplary, showing the careful preparation that had gone into this day. Louis had begun to grow restless, as any young child would during such a lengthy event. Catherine had anticipated this and quietly produced a small picture book from her bag. The book, specially chosen for its silent entertainment value, kept the youngest Wales child occupied without creating any disturbance. His occasional soft murmurs were barely noticeable in the vast space of the abbey, and his parents' calm management of the situation drew admiring glances from nearby guests. The moment of anointing arrived, one of the most sacred parts of the coronation ceremony. A golden canopy was held over the sovereign, shielding this most holy moment from public view. The abbey fell into an even deeper silence, if such a thing were possible. Even the youngest children in attendance seemed to sense the profound significance of what was occurring. William felt the hair on the back of his neck stand up, moved by the solemnity of the ancient ritual. As the ceremony continued, the interplay of ancient tradition and modern elements became increasingly apparent. While the core rituals remained unchanged from centuries past, subtle accommodations have been made for contemporary sensibilities. The music included both traditional hymns and newly commissioned pieces. The participants represented the full diversity of modern Britain, while maintaining respect for historical precedent. The Archbishop moved through each element of the service with practiced precision. His voice never wavered, despite the enormous pressure of performing this once-in-a-lifetime ceremony before a global audience. The other clergy members played their supporting roles flawlessly, their movements synchronized through careful rehearsal. The choir's voices rose and fell in perfect harmony, adding layers of beauty to the already magnificent occasion. William found himself deeply moved by the proceedings. Despite having attended numerous royal ceremonies throughout his life, this one felt different. Perhaps it was the knowledge that one day he would stand where the sovereign now stood. Perhaps it was watching his own children witness history in the making. Or perhaps it was simply the undeniable power of tradition, asserting itself in this ancient place. Catherine caught his eye during a particularly moving musical interlude. Her expression conveyed both understanding and support. She too was feeling the weight of the moment, the significance of their roles in this continuing story. Together, they were not just witnesses but participants in the great chain of monarchy that stretched from the distant past into the unknown future. The ceremony was building toward its climax, each element adding to the mounting sense of anticipation. The Wales family remained composed and attentive, playing their parts perfectly in this grand drama of state and faith. The moment everyone had been waiting for finally arrived. The Archbishop lifted the historic crown high above his head, its jewels catching the light and sending rainbow sparkles across the abbey walls. The entire congregation seemed to hold its breath as one. William felt his pulse quicken as he watched this pinnacle moment of the ceremony unfold. Beside him, George sat up straighter, his eyes fixed on the glittering symbol of royal power. Slowly, with infinite care, the Archbishop began to lower the crown. The silence in the abbey was absolute, broken only by the faint rustle of clothing as people leaned forward slightly to witness this historic moment. Catherine tightened her hold on Louis, who had become completely still, mesmerized by the spectacle. Charlotte's mouth formed a small O of wonder as she watched the crown descend toward its destined place. As the crown touched the sovereign's head, the abbey erupted in a thunderous cry of God save the King. The sound was overwhelming. Hundreds of voices raised in unison in the ancient acclamation. William's voice joined the chorus, strong and clear, while beside him George's younger voice rang out with surprising confidence. Even little Louis attempted to join in, his childish voice adding to the family's participation in this historic moment. Trumpets sounded from the gallery, their golden notes filling the vast space with triumphant music. The sound seemed to shake the very stones of the ancient building, announcing to the world that Britain had witnessed the crowning of a new monarch. Outside, the bells of the abbey began to peal, their joyous clanging taken up by churches across London and eventually across the entire nation. The emotional impact of the moment was visible on faces throughout the congregation. Some guests wiped away tears, moved by the combination of tradition, pageantry, and historical significance. Others smiled broadly, caught up in the joy of the occasion. William noticed foreign dignitaries nodding appreciatively, recognizing the unique power of British ceremonial tradition. The coronation had succeeded in its aim of uniting people in a shared moment of national significance. Following the crowning, the ceremony continued with the homage, where senior members of the nobility and clergy pledged their allegiance to the new sovereign. William watched as each person approached the throne, knowing that one day he too would make this sacred pledge. The thought was sobering, a reminder of the constitutional role that awaited him in the future. He glanced at George, wondering if his son was having similar reflections. Catherine had managed the children brilliantly throughout the long ceremony. As the homage continued, she quietly adjusted Louis's position, ensuring his comfort without creating any distraction. Charlotte had remained remarkably composed, only occasionally fidgeting with the hem of her dress. Her behavior demonstrated the careful preparation the family had undertaken, with Catherine conducting practice sessions to help the children understand what would be expected of them. The music swelled again as the ceremony moved toward its conclusion. The choir's voices rose in a magnificent anthem, their harmonies filling every corner of the abbey. The combination of ancient words and soaring melodies created an atmosphere of transcendent beauty. Even the youngest children in attendance seemed captivated by the power of the music, their usual restlessness forgotten in the face of such grandeur. William felt a profound sense of connection to his heritage as he participated in these ancient rituals. The ceremony linked him not just to previous monarchs, but to the entire sweep of British history. Every gesture, every word, every note of music carried echoes of the past while pointing toward the future. It was a responsibility he had been born to, but moments like these made him feel the full weight of that destiny. As the formal ceremony drew toward its close, the atmosphere in the abbey began to shift slightly. The tension of the most solemn moments gave way to a sense of celebration and accomplishment. The sovereign rose from the throne, now fully invested with the symbols of office. The transformation was complete, witnessed by representatives from across the globe and broadcast to millions more watching from their homes. The congregation prepared to process out of the abbey, their movements creating a rustle of anticipation for the celebrations that would follow. The magnificent organ music swelled once more as the procession began. The newly crowned sovereign led the procession down the abbey's long aisle, each step measured and dignified. William helped his family prepare to join the procession, ensuring everyone was ready for this final formal moment inside the ancient building. George straightened his shoulders, clearly understanding the importance of maintaining perfect posture as they walked. Catherine lifted Louis into her arms, knowing the little prince would need to be carried for this part of the ceremony. His energy had been remarkably well contained throughout the long service, but now he seemed ready to burst with excitement. Charlotte took her father's hand, her small fingers gripping tightly as they prepared to process out. The family had practiced this moment many times, but nothing could quite prepare them for the reality of walking through Westminster Abbey before the eyes of the world. As they joined the procession, William was struck by the sea of faces on either side of the aisle. Dignitaries from every corner of the globe watched their progress with respectful attention. Cameras followed their every move, broadcasting the images to billions of viewers worldwide. Yet despite the scrutiny, the Wales family moved with natural grace, their unity and composure evident in every step. The sound of the bells grew louder as they approached the great west door. Outside, William could hear the roar of the crowd, their cheers creating a wall of sound that seemed to shake the very air. The contrast between the solemn atmosphere inside the abbey and the jubilant celebration outside was striking. London had transformed into one giant party, with people celebrating in the streets, parks, and squares throughout the capital. Stepping out of the abbey into the bright daylight was almost overwhelming. The cheers hit them like a physical force. Thousands of voices raised in celebration. Flags waved frantically, creating a sea of red, white, and blue that stretched as far as the eye could see. The crowd had grown even larger during the ceremony, with people packed into every available space along the route back to Buckingham Palace. The state carriages waited in perfect formation, their gold trim gleaming in the sunlight. These historic vehicles, some dating back centuries, had been meticulously restored for this occasion. William helped his family into their designated carriage, ensuring everyone was safely seated before taking his own place. The children's eyes were wide with excitement as they realized they would be riding in these fairy tale conveyances through the streets of London. As the procession began to move, the cheers followed them like a wave. People pressed against the barriers, calling out good wishes and waving enthusiastically. Charlotte waved back with natural charm, her smile lighting up her face. George maintained a more reserved demeanor, but his eyes sparkled with excitement. Louis, from the safety of his mother's lap, waved both hands energetically, delighting the crowd with his uninhibited enthusiasm. The journey to Buckingham Palace became a moving celebration of national unity. People had traveled from all corners of the United Kingdom to witness this historic day. Scottish bagpipers played on one corner, while Welsh singers performed traditional songs on another. The diversity of the crowd reflected modern Britain, with people of all backgrounds united in their celebration of this ancient tradition. Catherine pointed out various sights to the children as they passed, turning the journey into an educational experience. She showed them the Commonwealth flags flying alongside the Union Jack, explaining how the monarchy connected Britain to nations around the world. William added his own observations, helping his children understand the significance of what they were witnessing. Even at their young ages, the children seemed to grasp that they were part of something much larger than themselves. The palace gates finally came into view, their golden details shining in the afternoon sun. The crowd here was even denser, with people who had waited for hours to see the royal family return. The noise was deafening, but it was a joyful sound that spoke of national pride and celebration. As their carriage swept through the gates, William knew the most public part of the day still lay ahead. The carriage rolled through the palace gates into the inner courtyard, where the sound of the crowds was slightly muffled by the high walls. Staff members who had been watching the ceremony on screens inside rushed to windows to catch a glimpse of the returning royal family. William helped Catherine and the children from the carriage, their formal clothes still remarkably pristine despite the long mourning. The excitement in the air was palpable as they made their way inside. The palace corridors buzzed with activity as final preparations were made for the balcony appearance. This would be the climactic moment that millions around the world were waiting to see. William knelt beside his children for a quick preparation talk. He reminded George about standing straight and tall, asked Charlotte to save her biggest waves for the balcony moment, and gave Louis a gentle hug while asking him to hold Mummy's hand tightly. Catherine quickly checked everyone's appearance in one of the palace's gilt mirrors. She smoothed Charlotte's hair and adjusted George's collar with the practiced efficiency of a mother who had done this many times before. Louis's outfit needed minor straightening after the carriage ride, but overall the family looked picture perfect. The children's excitement was building to fever pitch as they heard the crowds chanting outside. The walk to the balcony doors seemed both endless and all too quick. Through the tall windows, they could see the masses of people filling the mall and spreading into St. James's Park. The sea of humanity stretched as far as the eye could see, all waiting for this moment. Television cameras were positioned on every available vantage point, ready to broadcast the images around the globe. The weight of expectation was immense. As the doors opened, the roar from the crowd hit them like a physical wave. Thousands upon thousands of people cheered in unison, their voices creating a sound that seemed to shake the very foundations of the palace. William stepped out first, followed by Catherine with Louis in her arms. George and Charlotte flanked their parents, their young faces showing a mixture of excitement and awe at the spectacle before them. The view from the balcony was breathtaking. The mall had become a river of people, flags, and celebration. The trees lining the famous avenue were full of spectators who had climbed up for a better view. Large screens placed throughout the crowd showed close-up images of the royal family, causing fresh waves of cheering each time the children appeared on screen. The atmosphere was electric with joy and national pride. Charlotte began waving enthusiastically, her natural charm evident as she responded to the crowd's adoration. George stood more formally, but his smile was genuine as he took in the incredible scene. Louis, initially overwhelmed by the noise, soon joined his sister in waving, his chubby hands moving frantically as he caught the mood of celebration. Catherine and William exchanged glances, sharing their pride in how well their children were handling this momentous occasion. The traditional raft flyover began to approach from the distance. The sound of aircraft engines grew louder, adding to the cacophony of celebration. The children's excitement reached new heights as they spotted the planes approaching. William pointed them out to Louis, whose eyes went wide with wonder. The formation flew directly over the palace, the roar of their engines temporarily drowning out even the cheering crowds. Red, white, and blue smoke trails painted the sky in national colors. As the aircraft disappeared into the distance, the family remained on the balcony, soaking in the historic moment. The crowd showed no sign of dispersing, their energy seemingly inexhaustible. Chants of "God Save the King" rose spontaneously from different sections of the crowd, creating waves of sound that rolled across the gathering. The Wales family stood united, perfect representations of the monarchy's future. Looking out at the sea of celebrating people, William felt the profound connection between the royal family and the nation. This was what they served for, these moments when the entire country came together in celebration. His children were witnessing history, but more importantly, they were learning about their future roles in the continuing story of the British monarchy. As the sun began to set over London, the Wales family finally retreated from the balcony into the private quarters of the palace. The children were exhausted but still buzzing with excitement from the day's events. Their formal clothes, which had remained surprisingly neat throughout the ceremony, finally showed signs of the long day. Charlotte kicked off her shoes with relief, while George loosened his collar, finally able to relax after hours of perfect behavior. The private family dinner that followed was a marked contrast to the formality of the day. In the comfort of their private dining room, the family could finally be themselves. William helped Catherine serve a simple meal that the children actually wanted to eat after their light breakfast. The table conversation was filled with excited chatter as each child shared their favorite moments from the coronation ceremony. George, ever the thoughtful older brother, asked serious questions about the meaning behind various parts of the ceremony. His natural curiosity about his future role showed through as he wondered about the significance of the crown jewels and the ancient oaths. William answered patiently, proud of his son's mature interest in understanding his heritage. These were the teaching moments that helped prepare the future king for his eventual destiny. Charlotte regaled everyone with her observations about the beautiful dresses and uniforms she had seen throughout the day. Her artistic eye had caught details others might have missed, from the embroidery on ceremonial robes to the way the light caught the jewels in the crown. Catherine listened with amusement, recognizing her daughter's creative spirit and encouraging her detailed descriptions of the visual splendor they had witnessed. Louis, finally free from the constraints of formal behavior, ran circles around the dining table until William caught him up in a playful bear hug. The youngest Wales child dissolved into giggles, his infectious laughter filling the room. Despite his young age, He had performed remarkably well throughout the long day, and his parents made sure to praise him for being such a good boy during the ceremony. As the children finally began to wind down, Catherine and William exchanged meaningful looks across the table. They had successfully guided their young family through one of the most significant days in British history. The pressures had been immense, the scrutiny intense, but together they had risen to meet the challenge. Their children had shown remarkable poise and maturity, making their parents incredibly proud. Bath time became another adventure as the excited children continued to process the day's events. Louis splashed enthusiastically while recounting his version of the airplane flayover, complete with sound effects. Charlotte sang snippets of the hymns from the ceremony, her clear voice echoing in the bathroom. George helped his younger siblings, showing the responsible nature that would serve him well in his future role. Finally, as the children were tucked into their beds, a peaceful quiet settled over the palace. William sat on the edge of George's bed, talking quietly about the significance of what they had witnessed. He spoke of duty, service, and the privilege of their position, but in terms his young son could understand. George listened intently, his eyes heavy with exhaustion, but his mind still processing the momentous day. Catherine sang softly to Charlotte and Louis, her gentle voice helping them settle after all the excitement. The familiar lullabies provided comfort and normalcy after a day that had been anything but ordinary. One by one, the children drifted off to sleep, their dreams undoubtedly filled with crowns, carriages, and cheering crowds. Later that evening, William and Catherine stood together at their bedroom window, looking out over London. The city still glowed with celebration, parties continuing in the streets and parks. They reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment, and the path that lay ahead. Their children had taken their first major step onto the world stage, and they had done so with grace and dignity. As they prepared for bed, both knew that this was just the beginning. Their family would face many more historic moments, challenges, and celebrations in the years to come. But today had proven they could handle whatever destiny might bring. Together, they had helped write another chapter in the long story of the British monarchy, and their children were ready to carry that legacy forward into the future.